December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii Territory. Smoke still rose from the twisted metal of battleships as America counted its dead. But 5,000 miles away, in a mahogany-paneled office in London's Whitehall, British Air Ministry officials were making calculations that would prove spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. Air Marshal Sir Wilfred Freeman, leaning over production charts, expressed what many in the British military establishment believed: the Americans? Excellent at mass production of motor cars, certainly. But aircraft? That requires precision, craftsmanship, and with their men going to war. He paused, reviewing reports of American industrial capacity. They'll be relying on women. In factories. Building bombers. The skepticism in his voice was palpable. What Freeman and his colleagues couldn't imagine, what no one could imagine in those early days of December 1941, was that they were witnessing the beginning of the greatest industrial mobilization in human history. And at its heart would be millions of American women who would prove every assumption wrong. The situation in late 1941 was dire. Britain had been at war for over 2 years. The Royal Air Force was bleeding aircraft faster than British factories could replace them. When American entry into the war was discussed, British military planners had calculated maximum possible American aircraft production, perhaps 20,000 aircraft annually by 1943, assuming optimal conditions and experienced male workers. But there was a fundamental problem. America's men were going to war. In January 1942, as military conscription accelerated, American aircraft manufacturers faced a catastrophic labor shortage. Boeing's Seattle plant needed to increase production of B-17 Flying Fortresses from 3 per month to 16 per day. Douglas Aircraft in California needed to triple its workforce while tripling its output. Lockheed, Consolidated, North American Aviation, every major manufacturer faced the same impossible equation. The solution proposed by American industrialists seemed laughable to many observers, particularly British military advisers who had been sent to consult on American war production. William S. Knudsen, former General Motors executive and now director of the Office of Production Management, announced in February 1942, "We will recruit, train, and employ women on a scale never before attempted in manufacturing." A British technical liaison officer stationed at the Douglas plant in Long Beach, California, wrote in his report back to London dated March 15, 1942, "The Americans are proposing to place women, housewives, shopgirls, secretaries, in positions requiring precise riveting, complex assembly, and technical knowledge that takes our men months to acquire." While one admires their optimism, the mathematics of aircraft production suggest this experiment will result in significant delays and quality issues. The aircraft these women would supposedly build were not simple machines. A B-17 Flying Fortress contained 473,000 individual parts. Each aircraft required 21,000 man-hours of labor. The tolerances for wing assembly were measured in thousandths of an inch. A single improperly driven rivet could cause catastrophic failure at altitude. The fuel systems, hydraulics, electrical wiring, and engine mounting required technical precision that British observers insisted only experienced craftsmen could achieve. Consider the B-24 Liberator. Wingspan, 110 feet. Length, 67 feet. Empty weight, 36,500 pounds. 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 engines, each requiring precise mounting and alignment. 3,000 feet of wiring that had to be routed correctly or the aircraft would never fly. Bomb bay doors with complex mechanical linkages. A Norden bomb sight that cost more than the average American house. And America planned to build these, by the thousands, with women who had never held a rivet gun? The skepticism wasn't limited to the British. Many American executives shared similar doubts. In congressional testimony from April 1942, one aircraft manufacturer stated, "Women lack the physical strength for aircraft work. They lack the technical aptitude. They lack the emotional stability for precision work under pressure." We can employ them in certain limited capacities, fabric work, small parts assembly, but the backbone of aircraft production must remain male. The statistics seemed to support this pessimism. In January 1942, women comprised just 1% of the American aircraft industry workforce. Total monthly aircraft production: 1,396 aircraft of all types. The British were producing roughly the same amount. Together, the Allies were building perhaps 3,000 aircraft per month. Meanwhile, Germany was producing 1,500 military aircraft monthly. Japan was producing 1,200. The Axis powers had years of experience, established production lines, and stable workforces. Simple arithmetic suggested that even with American industrial might, the Allies would struggle to achieve air superiority before 1945 at the earliest. In London, military planners adjusted their expectations downward. A memo circulated in May 1942 among RAF leadership stated, "While American enthusiasm is appreciated, we must plan on the basis of realistic production figures. American female labor, while no doubt well-intentioned, cannot be expected to maintain the precision standards required for combat aircraft. We estimate actual useful production from American factories may reach 30 to 40% of stated goals by late 1943. What these British officers, these German intelligence analysts, these skeptical American executives didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that something extraordinary was already happening in factories from Seattle to Long Beach, from Wichita to Marietta. The women were arriving, and they were about to rewrite every equation. June 1942. Boeing Plant 2, Seattle, Washington. The morning shift whistle blew at 6 a.m. sharp. Through the factory gates came a sight that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. 847 women, reporting for their first full day of aircraft assembly work. They wore coveralls, their hair tied back in the bandanas that would become iconic. Most had never set foot in a factory before. Margaret Maggie Wilson, 28, former schoolteacher from Portland, later recalled in a 1943 War Production Board interview, "They handed me a rivet gun on my second day. Showed me once. I was terrified I'd ruin a $250,000 bomber." The foreman, old-timer, must have been 60. He just said, "Lady, we're building 16 of these a day now. You'll get good fast or you'll get gone." So I got good. The first test came faster than anyone expected. By August 1942, just 3 months after mass recruitment began, Boeing's Seattle plant had increased its female workforce from 140 to 4,900 women. They comprised 28% of the workforce. And then the numbers started coming in that made British observers check and recheck their data. Boeing B-17 production, January 1942, 86 aircraft. Boeing B-17 production, August 1942, 259 aircraft. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Not with a workforce in transition. Not with inexperienced workers. British technical advisors requested audits, certain there had been accounting errors or that aircraft were being counted before completion. But the B-17s were flying. And they were flying perfectly. What the skeptics hadn't anticipated was the American approach to training and production. Unlike British factories that relied on lengthy apprenticeships and craft tradition, American manufacturers had broken down aircraft assembly into teachable, repeatable operations. Women were trained in specific tasks with obsessive precision. A riveter didn't need to know how to build an entire aircraft. She needed to know how to drive 2,000 rivets per shift to exact specifications. And American women proved to have advantages no one had predicted. Physical strength? Women's smaller hands could reach into tight spaces in fuselage sections where men struggled. Precision? Study after study showed women's work had lower defect rates than men's. A Lockheed Internal Quality Control report from September 1942 noted, female workers in wing assembly demonstrate 24% fewer rejected rivets than comparable male workers. Manual dexterity testing suggests women may actually possess advantages in fine motor control required for aircraft work. Technical aptitude? That myth died fast. At North American Aviation in Inglewood, California, women were trained as aircraft electricians, installing the 3,000 feet of wiring in each B-25 Mitchell bomber. Within weeks, they were outperforming male electricians in both speed and accuracy. Dorothy Sanders, 24, former telephone operator, later described her experience in a 1944 newspaper interview. They told us we couldn't read blueprints, couldn't understand technical specifications. I was wiring ignition systems on P-51 Mustangs after 3 weeks. The fighter pilots' lives depended on my work. You think I wasn't going to learn fast? By October 1942, the numbers were undeniable. Total American aircraft production: 4,629 aircraft. Women comprised 31% of the aircraft industry workforce. British production for the same month: 2,143 aircraft. The Americans, supposedly hampered by inexperienced female labor, were producing more than twice the British output. The British response was revealing. In a confidential memo dated November 3, 1942, an RAF technical liaison officer wrote, "The production figures from American factories are verified and accurate. The quality of aircraft delivered is meeting or exceeding specifications. We must revise our assessment of female industrial capability." The Americans appear to have developed training and production methodologies that compensate for lack of traditional experience. Translation: We were wrong. But the real shock was still to come. December 1942. Representatives from the British Purchasing Commission visited the Consolidated Aircraft Plant in San Diego, where the B-24 Liberator was being produced. What they saw defied everything they thought they knew about aircraft manufacturing. The production line stretched for 3/4 of a mile. At one end, raw aluminum sheets. At the other end, 8 complete B-24 bombers rolling out every 24 hours. The workforce was 43% female. Women were doing everything: riveting, welding, electrical work, engine installation, even final aircraft inspection. But it was the numbers on the production board that stopped the British observers cold. Consolidated B-24 Liberator production. January 1942, 37 aircraft, mostly male workforce. December 1942, 213 aircraft, 43% female workforce. That was a 576% increase in 11 months. With a workforce that supposedly couldn't do the job. A British engineering officer, Squadron Leader James Pemberton, wrote in his official report, "I have personally inspected B-24s produced by majority female crews. Rivet work is exceptional. Systems installation meets all specifications. These aircraft are combat-ready and, in some measurable aspects, superior in construction quality to aircraft produced by our traditional methods." The implications were staggering. If American women could do this, if they could learn in weeks what British craftsmen took months to master, if they could maintain quality while increasing speed, then every calculation about the war's industrial balance was wrong. By January 1943, American aircraft production reached 5,438 aircraft in a single month. Women comprised 36% of the workforce. Britain and America combined were now producing 8,000 aircraft monthly, nearly triple the Axis output. And the American production was still accelerating. In London, British military planners were having difficult conversations. The Americans weren't just meeting expectations. They were exceeding the most optimistic projections by margins that suggested something fundamental had changed about industrial warfare. Martha Sharp, 32, former waitress, now lead inspector at Douglas Aircraft's Long Beach plant, summed it up in a letter to her husband serving in North Africa. They said women couldn't build bombers. Last month, our crew built 183 A-20 Havocs. Every single one flew. Every single one passed inspection. And honey, we're just getting started. She was right. The transformation was only beginning. But what came next would be beyond even American optimism. March 1943. Willow Run, Michigan. Henry Ford had built the largest factory building in the world, 3.5 million square feet under one roof, with a production line nearly 1 mile long. His promise to the government seemed insane. One B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. The Ford engineers said it was impossible. The British observers said it was American bravado. The women who worked there said, "Watch us." By May 1943, Willow Run was producing one B-24 every 63 minutes. The workforce was 52% female. What happened in 1943 wasn't just increased production. It was an industrial transformation that changed the mathematics of global warfare. American women didn't just meet production goals, they obliterated them. They didn't just match male workers, they exceeded them. And the numbers that resulted made German and Japanese military planners realize they were facing something unprecedented in human history. The statistics from mid-1943 tell a story of industrial domination. Boeing Seattle, 16.3 B-17s per day. Women comprised 47% of the workforce. Monthly production, 489 B-17 Flying Fortresses. Each one required 473,000 parts, 21,000 man-hours, and precision measured in thousandths of an inch. And they were rolling out faster than the Army Air Force could crew them. Consolidated San Diego, 11.2 B-24s per day. Women comprised 51% of the workforce. These weren't simplified aircraft. Full combat capability. Norden bomb sights. Sophisticated radar. All installed, calibrated, and tested by women whose average age was 27. Douglas Long Beach, 360 aircraft per month, various types. The night shift was 68% female. Quality reject rate, 1.7%, lower than the national average. North American Aviation Inglewood, P-51 Mustangs rolling out at a rate that would have been considered fantasy 2 years earlier. 15 complete fighters per day. Women were assembling the Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, installing them, and conducting ground tests. Ruth Wilson, 29, former department store clerk, became a lead engine mechanic at North American. In a 1943 interview with the War Production Board, she stated, "I'd never changed the oil in a car before the war. Now I'm responsible for final inspection on Merlin engines. Each one produces 1,490 horsepower. Each one has to be perfect or a pilot dies. So they're perfect." The British military establishment was no longer skeptical. They were astonished. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, commander of RAF Bomber Command, visited American aircraft factories in June 1943. His report back to Churchill was marked "Most Secret" and stated, "The Americans are achieving production rates we believed physically impossible. The quality of female workmanship is exceptional." More significantly, American women have developed production innovations that improve on our traditional methods. We are witnessing not merely quantity, but advancement in manufacturing technique. Translation: British skepticism had blinded them to American innovation. The tactical innovations developed by American women were remarkable. At Boeing, a team of female riveters developed a new technique for installing fuselage panels that reduced assembly time by 19 minutes per aircraft. Multiplied across 16 aircraft per day, that was 5 extra B-17s per week. The technique was adopted industry-wide. At Lockheed's Burbank plant, producing P-38 Lightning fighters, women in the electrical department redesigned the wire routing in the nose section, reducing installation time by 40% while improving maintainability. Mary Parker, the lead electrician, had been a switchboard operator before the war. The psychological impact on America's enemies was profound. German intelligence reports from late 1943 show growing alarm. A captured Luftwaffe planning document from September 1943 stated, "American aircraft production has reached levels we cannot match." Intelligence suggests female labor comprises approximately 50% of their workforce. This suggests either our intelligence is flawed, or the Americans have solved industrial problems we believed unsolvable. Japanese military planners were equally shocked. Vice Admiral Mato Mugaki wrote in his diary in August 1943, "American aircraft numbers suggest they are outproducing our entire industrial capacity with what are reportedly female factory workers. This cannot be sustained." Yet each month, the numbers increase. But it was sustained. And it kept increasing. By September 1943, American aircraft production reached 7,742 aircraft in a single month. To put that in context, that was more than Germany's total production for any 3-month period of the war. More than Japan produced in 6 months. It was an avalanche of aluminum, rivets, engines, and precision that was crushing Axis air forces through sheer numerical impossibility made real. The types of aircraft were equally impressive. B-17 Flying Fortresses, B-24 Liberators, B-25 Mitchells, B-26 Marauders, P-38 Lightnings, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, C-47 Transports, F-4U Corsairs, F-6F Hellcats, bombers, fighters, transports, trainers. From single-engine fighters to 4-engine bombers. All built to exacting specifications. All combat-ready. And women were doing it all. Helen Studer, riveter at Boeing, later recalled, "British officers would tour the plant. They'd watch us work. You could see them doing math in their heads, checking their clipboards. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. One of them asked me how long I'd been doing this. I said 6 months. He said in Britain it took 2 years to train a riveter to this standard. I told him, in America we don't have 2 years. So we get good in 6 months." The cascade of production continued through late 1943 and into 1944. Each month brought new records. October 1943, 8,013 aircraft. November 1943, 8,119 aircraft. December 1943, 8,290 aircraft. January 1944, 8,503 aircraft. By early 1944, women comprised 44% of the American aircraft industry workforce, approximately 310,000 women building bombers, fighters, and transports. They were riveters, welders, electricians, engine mechanics, inspectors, and quality control specialists. They were working 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Churchill himself acknowledged the transformation. In a speech to Parliament in February 1944, he stated, "The American industrial achievement, particularly in aircraft production, has exceeded our most optimistic projections. We owe a debt of gratitude to the American people, and particularly to the women of America, whose contribution to victory cannot be overstated." From useless to cannot be overstated in 26 months. But perhaps the most telling moment came in March 1944. A delegation of British aircraft executives visited the Douglas plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They watched as the 5,000th C-47 transport rolled off the production line. The final assembly crew was entirely female. The British executives requested permission to inspect the aircraft. Chief Inspector Barbara Miller, former high school mathematics teacher, handed them her clipboard. Inspection complete. All systems nominal. She's ready to fly to England. The Douglas test pilot, a man, nodded. If Barbara says she's ready, she's ready. I've never had a rejection from her crew. The British executives inspected the C-47 anyway. They found nothing wrong. Because there was nothing wrong. The transformation was complete. What had been dismissed as impossible was now routine. What had been mocked as useless was now essential. The women who supposedly couldn't build aircraft were building more aircraft, faster and better, than any nation had ever produced. The skeptics had been not just wrong, but catastrophically, embarrassingly, historically wrong. And the final numbers would make that even more clear. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. As celebration swept through Allied capitals, military statisticians compiled final production numbers. What they found was almost incomprehensible, a manufacturing achievement so massive that it had fundamentally altered the balance of global power. Total American aircraft production, 1941 to 1945, 324,750 aircraft. To understand the scale, that was more aircraft than all Axis powers combined produced during the entire war. More aircraft than had been built in all of human history before 1939. And approximately 40% of those aircraft, roughly 130,000, were built with female labor as the majority or substantial portion of the workforce. The breakdown by year reveals the transformation. 1941, 19,433 aircraft, women, 1% of workforce. 1942, 47,836 aircraft, women, 29% of workforce. 1943, 85,898 aircraft, women, 39% of workforce. 1944, 96,318 aircraft, women, 44% of workforce. 1945, 46,001 aircraft through August, women, 41% of workforce. The British had projected American production might reach 50,000 aircraft total by 1945, accounting for female labor difficulties. The actual number was 324,750. The projection was off by 549%. Consider specific aircraft types built predominantly with female labor. B-24 Liberator, 18,482 built. More than any other American aircraft type. The majority produced at plants where women comprised 45 to 52% of the workforce. B-17 Flying Fortress, 12,731 built. Boeing's Seattle plant alone produced 6,981 B-17s with a workforce that averaged 47% female from 1943 to 1945. P-51 Mustang, 15,586 built. The fighter that many historians credit with winning the air war over Europe. North American aviation's female workforce averaged 42% during P-51 production. C-47 Skitran, over 10,000 built. The transport aircraft that supplied Allied forces worldwide. Douglas's Tulsa plant, which produced thousands of C-47s, had a female workforce exceeding 50% for most of the war. The industrial capacity these women enabled was unprecedented. At peak production in March 1944, American aircraft factories were producing 9,113 aircraft per month. That's 304 aircraft per day. 12.6 aircraft every hour. One complete combat aircraft rolling out of American factories every 4 minutes and 45 seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Germany's peak monthly production was 3,375 aircraft in July 1944. Japan's peak was 2,857 in September 1944. Combined, the Axis powers at their maximum effort produced 6,232 aircraft monthly. America alone produced 9,113. And women were the margin of victory. The quality statistics are equally impressive. Final rejection rates for aircraft produced in predominantly female plants averaged 1.9%, slightly better than the national average of 2.1%. Combat loss rates due to manufacturing defects were virtually zero. Analysis of returned combat aircraft showed riveting and assembly work from female crews was indistinguishable from or superior to male-produced work. Cost efficiency improved dramatically. As women mastered production techniques, labor hours per aircraft decreased. B-17, from 21,000 hours, 1942, to 18,600 hours, 1944. B-24, from 23,000 hours, 1942, to 19,400 hours, 1944, p. 51. From 9,800 hours, 1942, to 7,200 hours, 1944. Multiplied across hundreds of thousands of aircraft, these efficiencies saved millions of man-hours and hundreds of millions of dollars, resources that could be directed elsewhere in the war effort. The British military establishment, initially so skeptical, became advocates. Air Marshal Sir John Slessor wrote in his 1956 memoir, "We underestimated American industrial capacity. More significantly, we underestimated the capability of American women. Our prejudices, and they were prejudices, blinded us to what was possible. The Americans proved that with proper training, organization, and determination, women could."